2003 Media, I'm Campbell Barron, and this is The Ones Who Succeed. Welcome to the program. One of my favorite ways to think about building companies goes all the way back to the California gold rush of 1849, when investing in land and mining on the promise of striking gold didn't seem that different from modern-day tech entrepreneurship, now did it? And while a fraction of the many searching for gold actually built fortunes doing so, the gold rush created a new wave of entrepreneurs, capitalizing on the hype by selling products to prospectors looking to make a fortune. So in simple terms, if your company can sell the pickaxes and supplies to the individuals partaking in the gold rush, whatever that gold rush may be, well, then as long as the dream is kept alive, your company is solving a problem and will likely do better than the vast majority of entrepreneurs on the search for gold themselves. So today on the show, I'm thrilled to have a conversation with Sarah Hum, an entrepreneur who has built a product called Canny for other tech entrepreneurs to essentially capture feedback in one organized place, which can be used to inform your product decisions, all while simplifying the feedback process. The company was founded in 2017 and has intentionally taken $0 from investors. However, recently in September 2020, the company hit a milestone that many founders dream of. Canny is a business that generates $1 million in annual recurring revenue. And as a result, Sarah, based in Toronto, joined this program via Zoom to discuss the origin story of Canny, why she decided not to take investor money, and of course, how her experience building Canny thus far has shaped her ambition for the years to come. This is The Ones Who Succeed. I'm Campbell Barron. My conversation with Sarah Hum starts now. If you can introduce yourself, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Sarah Hum. I'm one of the founders of Canny. We're a SaaS company, and we help software teams collect, manage, and understand feedback so they can prioritize the most impactful projects. So we have customers like Compass, Lyft. Oh, I think Jim from Axios was on here. I think they're a customer as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Axios? Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Now, simplify this for our audience. We have an audience that is interested in startups, but we also have some people that are just interested in kind of company building, but maybe kind of towards the, just starting to get interested in this. And not a crazy startup nerd like myself. Talk about the very unique value prop, because when you're building a product, if the core trigger in regards to Canny is feedback or feature request or ideas, etc., why would you need Canny? Why couldn't I just, set up a Google form or a Trello board and accomplish the same thing?
Yeah, so totally. So a lot of small businesses start with what you just mentioned. They'll use Trello, they'll use a spreadsheet. But, spreadsheets like the biggest killer of startups, I feel. And so that totally makes sense. I think that's what I would actually recommend for small businesses. Like, you don't need anything when you don't have a ton of volume of feedback. The companies that are most successful in Canny, they have a feedback problem. It's hard to stay on top of it. They're getting it on a consistent basis. PMs are getting pinged on Slack and whatever. And it's very hard to manage. And at the end of the day, it just falls by the wayside. People don't get heard. And it becomes something that's not included when they prioritize. And I think that's a huge loss. So that's what we're going to do, just help them listen better.
Now, what was your entry point in the world of startups pre-Canny? I know you spent some time at Facebook. I know you were a digital nomad for a certain period of time. Very interesting.
Yeah, pre-pandemic. So I mean, it's funny because I guess the early version of Canny, I started back in university, where it was kind of like this thesis-y project where I just could build whatever I wanted. After that, I went to Facebook for about a year and a half. And so it was
And this was in San Francisco.
Yeah, it was in SF in the head office. And my co-founder had just quit Facebook. So I was kind of doing my thing and he was doing his. He was kind of trying to get our side project off the ground. It was called Product Pains. I still cringe at that name. But that's what we were doing. We were kind of just treating it as a side project, kind of building things for fun because we liked working together. And then eventually, it just made sense for me to jump ship and kind of go all in on it. So that's eventually what became Canny.
Now you were in San Francisco working at Facebook. Talk about that experience. And did you? I have to imagine that you had some takeaways from your Facebook experience that kind of influenced your success down the road.
Yeah, honestly, I guess I was expecting that even more than it ended up being. There's nothing like working and building a startup, like especially comparing to a giant company like Facebook. Like the processes, how things get done are so different. And yeah, maybe it'll come in handy down the line if we're massive. But like for now, like I've learned so much more at Canny than my year and a half at Facebook. I think the main thing that I would take away from there is just like the importance of meeting people and connecting with people as opposed to like the actual work I did there. Yeah. So I would say that's the main thing. It's not really, I learned how to build a startup by working at Facebook. It was a nice, quick stamp on my resume just to show some legitimacy, but not too much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a company, there's just completely different people working at a large company versus a startup. If you were going to start Canny over again, and you could today, and you were just coming out of university or high school, just you were ready to kind of jump into it, would you get some working experience at a larger company?
I think if I could do it again, I would do an internship or something, get some experience at a smaller business, under 100 people. 50 people, something like that. That's kind of like the big gap. I did, early stage startups, and then I did Facebook, which, you're missing a huge portion. And so that's what I feel like I was missing. But, we're here doing our thing, and it's going pretty well. So no, can't complain.
And it seems like the origin story of Canny is heavily tied to this decision that you and your co-founder made, who is also your boyfriend, that you are going to travel and build the company. And this was obviously pre-pandemic. And that's a very interesting idea, because in the Silicon Valley kind of, echo chamber, if you will, that's not necessarily like the Andreessen Horowitz or kind of textbook advice, which is to go and work at a co-working office in Bangkok or wherever you may be. Does that not overcomplicate the actual company building, which seems incredibly difficult on its own?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's, we have priorities outside of our company, stuff that I wanted to do. Like I really wanted to travel. I was living in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and doing Canny just enabled us to do that. In the early days, we don't have that many customers, like we have flexibility. And so I felt like that was a big opportunity for me to take and just go travel while building this thing. It wasn't the traditional travel where I'm just experiencing new places. Really, we hung out in coffee shops, co-working spaces, but it was really, really fun. Just have, different background every day.
And would you recommend this to an entrepreneur? I mean, obviously you can't now, but.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think if you're raising money, like that might be a different thing. And that's maybe a part of why we didn't. You have people to respond to and follow up with all the time, and they want to know kind of what you're doing. And I feel like if you're traveling, that might not be on their list of things. And so, yeah, I think if you're bootstrapping, like you are not tied to a specific place, you're not tied to specific people, you don't have people to report to, by all means, like it's really, really cool.
Now, you were blogging this process as you were on the road, which I think is very interesting, because it seems like if you can build somewhat of a personal brand, that almost, not guarantees, but increases the odds of potential distribution for a product that you could be working on or are working on. I know what's really hot right now is the idea of being a creator and then launching a product on the side, and then you kind of just jump the entire paid acquisition model because you have a bunch of loyal fans. And obviously on this was probably a little bit of a smaller scale, but what was the trigger that ultimately led you to decide to start blogging your journey, building Canny? Yeah, I think we knew we had to do marketing. Like we knew building the product didn't mean people will come and use it. And we aren't marketers. Neither of us, we're product people. We know how to build things. And when it came to marketing, we were really just like, what can we write about? And I think it just flowed a lot better when we could just tell stories about what we were doing. It was way easier. It was literally telling a story. Literally, we lived it, and it was really easy to do. But also, I think people really resonated with it because of how authentic it was. And so it ended up kind of accidentally being what it was. It just kind of helped people get to know us and what our story is. So it wasn't really like, this is our marketing strategy. It was really just like, what can we write about and what comes naturally to us. Yeah, I mean, and eventually you and your co-founder settled down in Toronto.
Yeah.
Are you Canadian, by the way? Are you from here?
I am. My
Okay.
co-founder is from Seattle, but we're in Toronto now.
And did you ever at any point have an office in Toronto?
No, we're a fully remote company. Actually, most of the team is still in the States, but across the country. And we have one in Estonia and one in Argentina now too. So I don't think we'll ever have an office. I don't find the need to have an office. My office is 3 seconds away from my bedroom. I love it. And I don't imagine that would be changing anytime soon.
So I want to pick at this idea because this is something I talk about with almost every founder now post-pandemic, which is the idea of having an office. And I think what I've gotten from this is, companies that have scaled and that are larger, that have grown pretty quickly pre-pandemic tend to kind of hold on to the office because they either are tied to that lease. However, startups seem to be much more interested in the idea of kind of the remote lifestyle and the remote office setup. And I think that's very interesting. I think both have their positives and negatives. So I want to ask you about this idea of being remote, because it seems like you as a founder never really looked to kind of what founder A or founder B was doing in regards to how to structure a company. They're raising money, so I should raise money. It seems like you kind of went your own path from day one, right? Sure. Clearly you decided to build a company in Bangkok and all over the world. That's not, not your standard kind of startup procedure. But I'm very curious in regards to this idea of remote work. I take it the company was remote pre-pandemic too.
Yeah. We were planning that the whole time, I feel like. Just personally traveling, it was us two for a while. So it didn't ever make sense to start an office. It felt really unnatural to us. So it's just never been on our minds. Yeah.
So talk about scaling, because Canny, you've raised $0, which I want to get into, but you've also built a company that has real employees and is cash flow positive because it has to be. Yeah. So talk about scaling a remote company versus kind of just, if it's you and your co-founder. Every startup seems to have their own playbook here.
Yeah, one of the things about me is this is my first startup. This is the first company I'm founding. So it's not like I have this playbook that has worked before that I'm implementing here. And so a lot of it is just listening to our team and saying, hey, is this meeting weird? Should we not have it? And just making sure we listen and we adjust as needed. In terms of hiring, I feel like we have more access to talent now that we're remote. There's a lot of people around the world looking for jobs that aren't in San Francisco that are really talented. And so we can scoop those people up. I think if we had an office in Toronto even or San Francisco, it would be a lot harder. And I don't think we need to be crippled that way. So I find that actually as an advantage here. We've kind of figured out a recruiting process. And so we're just taking it day by day. We don't hire, super often. We're not hiring right now. So it's not something that takes a ton of our time, and it's worked well.
Now, this is really interesting because if you are building a product or a company, especially in Silicon Valley, there's almost this romantic idea of your first office. And so to skip that ultimately when everyone else was having offices is one decision. But to kind of, lead the way, if you will, since you were doing this pre-pandemic, companies that are going remote seem like they were kind of just looking around for how are you doing things? How are you doing things? Kind of all these processes. Because honestly, it seems like a company that has an office and all employees in one city seems like the processes and flows are quite different from a remote company. What do you see as the biggest value prop in regards to the idea of remote work? Because I do know that there are people who just simply are not a fan because they get lonely. I do know that office chatter seems to kind of disappear because there is no office. But I also know it's a lot cheaper because you don't have to take out a big lease on an office in Toronto. Yeah. So how do you look at this?
Yeah, in terms of the cheapness part, we save money in the office, but we also invest a lot of time and money into getting the team together. Pre-pandemic, of course, we try to have 3 to 4 team retreats per year, just to really get to know people. I think you work together better when you're not just another person on my screen. And so we've done 4 retreats. And
what's an example?
Yeah, so our most recent one, or our last one, was December last year. We went to Prague, and it was wintry. It was it was really nice just to hang out. We try to work during the day. In December we did kind of like next year's planning, that kind of stuff. But then also just like went to Christmas markets and like had drinks together, and it was just a really good time getting to know people. And so you have these relationships online and it changes offline. You don't know how tall a person is until you meet them in person, right? It's a really different dynamic. And so we do invest a lot of time in that. The people that we hire, especially now, like we're all very independent people. We all have our own responsibilities. And so being remote, it just allows us that space to really have our own time. We try to have barely any meetings per week. And so, yeah, when we're hiring, we want to be careful that these people aren't the type to get super lonely, or people who have had experience doing remote. We also, try not to hire in Australia, for example, because it doesn't feel like they would have a good time. We wouldn't be able to provide them with like a team feel because they would be awake when we're sleeping. So yeah, Europe's kind of the furthest east we've gone. So yeah, I think there's many, many advantages, and I don't know, like I wouldn't do it any other way, really.
Now, I think the my follow-up question would be, and I guess this doesn't necessarily apply to you 100% because you were remote pre-pandemic, but how have you noticed that your workflow has evolved pre and post-pandemic?
Yeah,
because
I mean,
sorry,
us.
I'm just going to add one more thing here, because the real, for people listening who are not really doing remote work, I think it's like, well, it's work from home is work from home, but work from home pre-pandemic was like work from a coffee shop, work from like the ski hill, work from, the beach, etc. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's company-wise, like our processes and whatever are still the same. And like the only impacts are personally, like I can't go to my favorite coffee shop. So that's the only real change. I don't think it had impact on the company at all. We're just kind of sad about the state of the world. But yeah, other than that, like our operations are the same.
Do you find yourself more or less productive?
The same. I don't know. I think like the only real sad part is not having retreats. And we're looking forward to the time when we can. Like business wise, sure, we had a dip in March/April, but like SaaS is killing it right now. So we're doing better than we were doing pre-pandemic. So yeah, to just like continue building.
Now, I want to talk about a decision you made early on, basically, it seems like from day one, you and your co-founder, which was to skip the venture capital track.
Yeah.
And it seems like this narrative is really heavily tied to the story of Canny. But the reason I bring it up is because you were in Silicon Valley, you were in San Francisco, you were in startup venture capital, quite frankly. And I'm sure you saw people around you deciding to raise venture. And it almost seems like now it's just, and for better or for worse, and I've had this conversation with many entrepreneurs on the podcast, do you actually need to raise venture capital for every startup? A lot of people like the idea of being able to say I raised X money, and yet most startups don't work out.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to build your company in a way known as bootstrapping, which essentially means you haven't taken investor money? And walk me through the thought process here, even pre-Canny, like what ultimately influenced this decision?
Yeah. So, I mean, going back, like coming from Toronto, like when I first arrived in Silicon Valley, it was, the stars were shining, everything was amazing. And, they really sell that dream really well. I was an intern. I was just kind of getting my foothold. I think when I started working there full time, it kind of, I don't know, spirals downward just a little bit. Like you see people building companies and raising money, and it just doesn't seem super fun. You're really reporting to investors, giving them literally a slice of your pie. And it just didn't seem like the company that I wanted to build. I don't know. I want to be my own boss. I want to travel. I want to do what I want to do. And I don't want somebody telling me I can't do that. So just seeing people in my network, like starting companies, it didn't seem like a right fit for the life that I wanted. And yeah, I know coming from Silicon Valley, like that's what you should want kind of. But yeah, it just didn't really appeal to me or my co-founder. So we literally like told our roommates, hey, we're headed out. And we left a week later and traveled the world for 2 years.
Now, I think that's interesting because if you raise money, theoretically, on paper, it doesn't seem like you would work for your investors. Your investors work for you. But talk about some of the kind of hidden obligations here that you got insight into that you were like, yeah, I'm not super down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just having someone on your board, having someone that has a voice that isn't yours, that you don't necessarily trust or agree with. Like, I think startups are hard enough as it is. Like, you really, really need to be able to trust your partners. I see, people falling out with their co-founders every day, and it's like, dang, like startups are so hard, and you have to deal with not being able to trust who you're in the boat with. So that was a big part of it. I think like my co-founder and I, we've known each other for a while. Like we're a couple. Like we can trust each other, and we never need to worry about, hey, what is John doing? So that's what's worked for us.
Yeah. Now, was there ever a doomsday scenario which you envisioned in your head in regards to like, if we raise money, then this happens, and oh my God, that'd be so awful, and so I'm just not going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, so we applied for YC and we ended up doing the interview and we didn't get funded. But I think at that time I was kind of like, oh, I'm glad we didn't get funded. I don't know. I think if we had gotten funded, like our journey might not have gone well. I don't know. It's hard to say. You never know. But at that moment, I was kind of like, I'm glad this decision was kind of made for me and we could do what we want with our life. So that was the only time that we were like, oh, maybe this would be cool. I think they really sell their story well, and it's probably a really cool program. But yeah, I'm glad that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think this also plays into the greater narrative that not every company is venture scale. And I'm not saying your company isn't venture scale, but I think the easiest way to test if your company is venture scale is to do it without venture money and then see later on. And now there are actually not sometimes, there are many times where you just physically can't do that if you're manufacturing a good and you just can't bootstrap it. There are quite a few companies that just simply can't be bootstrapped and need money, right? Yeah. And I think that's the big differentiator there. But what's the main negative, other than the fact that you're giving up a portion of your company and other than the fact that you have to answer to investors? There are some negatives in addition to those two, that some founders find that the idea of taking on venture money and racing the clock to grow to raise your next round isn't necessarily for them. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think like people talk about growth at all costs, right? And I think that's the big thing is that's not what we're about. We have personal lives. We have things that we need to be happy. And a lot of times, like it's not growth at all costs. We make mistakes and we're fine with making those mistakes. And we don't fudge numbers to make ourselves look better. And I don't know, we don't hire and throw money at every single problem that we have. We're a small team that has done some big things. So that's like what I'm most proud of is doing it with these people and, hitting decent milestones.
On Twitter, you openly share about the number of investors that have reached out to you that you've turned down, which I think is very interesting. Do you ever think like, you know what, maybe I think now is the time that I should raise venture? Did you ever want to raise any money?
Honestly, I don't think so. You never know what might happen. Maybe the market changes, something happens, and maybe we do want a little boost to get somewhere. But honestly, like we're a profitable company. We have money in the bank to try things if we need to. So yeah, I don't think we would ever need to.
Talk about this idea of being a profitable company. That's weird in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So but I'm curious because, unlike a venture, scale business where you're basically racing the clock to IPO or exit or kind of go, there's three modes: IPO, exit, or collapse. There's really no kind of in between. It's either like Uber or nothing and grow at all costs or die trying, which ultimately, results in kind of a bunch of pretty cool products that should have been bootstrapped that still would be around today that just didn't make it because they couldn't raise their next round, which I think is unfortunate. But I'm curious, what's the long-term trajectory for Canny? Is it just going to constantly be eventually a cash cow that you just keep running for the rest of your life? Is it something that you potentially would sell in the future? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think honestly, people ask us this when, they're looking to join our team. And I wish I had a better answer, but really we're just building cool things. We're a product team. We want to build cool things. We want people to use our cool things. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but I think when we're talking about, the future and people who are joining us, they're taking a big risk. And so how do we think we can pay back that risk? There are other options, profit sharing, buying back their shares, whatever it is that isn't one of those options that I think we can consider. Or maybe, there's something that nobody's thinking about that we could do. Yeah. So I don't have a plan to be like, oh, well, we're targeting to be acquired by XYZ. Like, that's not how we look at things. We're taking it day by day, really. And yeah, just looking at what cool stuff we can build.
Would you be open to selling the company though?
I think it's such a big part of my life that I can't imagine not doing it. I don't know. I think everyone has a number. If we're talking about money, everyone, I guess, has a number. I'm not sure. And if that came along, I guess I would be seriously, I would seriously consider it. But I don't have plans. No.
I mean, you've gone further than many companies who've raised venture capital, than most companies who've raised venture capital. And in September of 2020, you hit this milestone where Canny is generating $1 million in annual recurring revenue. And for the non-startup folks, that's essentially means the company generates $1 million a year or is on track to generate $1 million a year. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
With zero venture funding, zero investment. If you and your co-founder are partners, I can assume that you are 50-50 and collectively you own 100% of the company, which also means that if someone were to acquire you, that would look a lot different than if you had to give up, 40% of the company to raise your seed round. And so this is very interesting because, most founders just quite frankly don't get here. Right. And this is kind of the dream. And I think there are two dreams. There's almost like this venture dream, and there's this, kind of smaller company, grow a little bit slower, but you still retain the equity dream. And both are valid and both are for different people. But in regards to this kind of retain the equity dream, building a company that is profitable and can sustain itself is awesome. It's very, that's kind of the goal here in the ballpark you're playing in. And you wrote this fantastic blog post basically detailing how you did this, how we built a $1 million ARR SaaS startup. And I really want to talk about this a little bit, spend a little bit of time here, because I think the part of the reason and the benefits of talking to you are kind of the insights I can basically share for other founders who are thinking about starting companies or maybe in these buckets that we'll go in here. And you split this blog post into various stages: $0 to $1,000 in ARR, so that's $1,000 a year, so not much. 1,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 50, so on. So if you can break down these various stages and the journey, and maybe a high level summary of this post, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think when this post was put together, we looked at really what our different milestones were. And a lot of it ends up aligning with the money because it aligns with kind of our hires as well. We only hire when we have enough money. And so that's kind of what ended up making sense. It's interesting. You can see how long the first periods took and then how it kind of speeds up afterwards. But, at the beginning, it was a lot about, figuring out the problem. What are we doing here? What are we selling? Who's buying? That kind of stuff. And then eventually it turned into kind of how do we hire people? How do we sell people on the dream that we're living? And then beyond that, it's how do we make this bigger? And how do we do it with still a small team? So yeah, I think that a lot of it was in those main buckets.
And more specifically though, let's say you have an idea. Let's say I have an idea right now.
Sure.
How do you go from idea to $1,000 in ARR?
Yeah, I think, I think luck plays into it a lot, but at the same time, it's talk to your customers. We were building this community that, some people were using, but nobody was paying for. And eventually some people were like, hey, if you built this thing, we would pay you $20 a month. We're like, oh, $20 is a lot more than $0. So we can start somewhere and just identify the problems, identify, what are people willing to pay for? And that's a huge indicator, right? People aren't going to pay for it if it doesn't solve a problem of theirs. And so we started building things that people were asking for. And eventually we could start charging more money than $20 a month. And yeah, just taking it from there. I think for us, like we are product people, so it's easier for us to kind of really execute on that stuff. If you can't, I find that a lot harder. But yeah, like if we were to fail that idea, which happens all the time, we would just pick something else and try that. Like we are our best resource. And so we just build, we test it out, we try to launch it, see if people take to it. If not, try again. Not a big deal.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to skim over the idea of getting users because it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And you had this very successful launch on Product Hunt in 2017, which honestly, quite frankly, looks a lot different from Product Hunt today.
Yes.
I think it was probably a more vibrant community in 2017.
Yeah, it was.
And that's fine. These social products kind of come and go with prominence, but I think the results if you launch today on Product Hunt would be quite different than 2017.
Yeah.
So what are some low budget bootstrap founder acquisition strategies for just to simply get your first 1,000 users, let's say?
Yeah.
Or not 1,000 paying customers is a lot, but like first, 50, 10 paying customers, because this is actually very difficult. And if you build it and they will come is really just not true in 2020. Yes. And so I really want to go over this.
Yeah, I think like we hit on this earlier too. Like if I were to do this again, I would probably invest more into building my personal brand. I'm a cool person. I have cool thoughts. I have opinions that you may or may not agree with, whatever it is. Like building that out, I guess Twitter, whatever it is, whatever people are on, but just getting people excited about me as a person and potentially what I'm doing. Yeah, if I didn't have Product Hunt today, I think it would be a lot harder. But there are, a lot of communities. There's Facebook communities. There's Twitter is a giant community. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. So I don't think it's impossible. I think it's kind of easy to press that kind of launch button, but like a lot of things in startups are hard. So accept it and just like try what you can. A lot of people are being successful with newsletters and like writing good content. So just cut through the noise somehow, write stuff that people will resonate with, write stuff that's helpful. I think that's a huge thing is people write, but if it's not helpful, it's kind of pointless. So really just invest in helping people and tying that back to who you are as a person.
Now, do you see building your personal brand or are you putting an effort into kind of continue to grow your personal brand from a company success standpoint?
Yeah, I think I tweet every once in a blue moon kind of thing. It's definitely more about like quality over quantity. I'm so often I'm heads down, like building product. I'm still a builder, even though I'm one of the founders here. Like I want to make sure I ship code and stuff like that. So my next tweet is almost never on my mind. So I usually look at like milestones, like our 1 million, stuff like that I can share with the community. They kind of like hearing about that, but also not, hey, we reached 1 million. It's like, here's what we learned through this journey. So yeah, I think people know my name here and there, but it's not something that I'm like, I have to push this further. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it comes off authentically if you think of it that way either. Yeah, so I'm just doing what feels right to me.
Yep, fair enough. Yeah. All right, I want to kind of wrap up here. So a few more questions here. When you're building Canny in 10 years, let's say you think back, you go to 10 years, is it acquired? Is it still a cash flow business? Is the ambition to kind of keep growing the team just as you can afford it? Or is the ambition to kind of build a lifestyle business?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we like the term lifestyle business. I feel like it implies we're doing what we need to get by, have passive income, which is great. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that's really cool. And people who can, build this thing, kind of leave it as is and just live life, I think that's really cool. But for us, I feel like we're still very ambitious. Like we have ambitious like growth goals. We report to ourselves, which often is like one of the hardest things. We're hard on ourselves. For Andrew and I personally, like we have a team to support now, which is a huge weight. Like it's
how big is your team today?
It's 9. We're 9.
All right.
Including
That's
us,
a lot of people.
including the two of us. So like we have a responsibility. They have families. Like the fact that we're profitable, I feel like has some comfort, a lot of comfort to it.
You need to be, quite frankly.
Yes. Like I never want anybody to feel like, oh, I could lose my job at any second, especially through this pandemic. Like, I don't think anybody on our team was like, oh, we might be in trouble here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I envision just building cool stuff again, like with cool people. I think that's one of the biggest rewards here is like, it was just me and Andrew for so long. And now we have other personalities and other interesting things to talk about, which I find super rewarding. So if I were doing this 10 years down the line, I wouldn't be upset about that. I mean, I'm sure my personal life will change and we'll have to adapt. But honestly, I feel like this is pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you're living the dream. Do you ever, and now with that being said, do you have any sleepless nights? Are you ever worried? You say you're hard on yourself. That's a little vague.
I think when the pandemic first hit, we were kind of like, oh, we have no idea what's going to happen. People were canceling left and right. Mostly like travel and healthcare and whatever was just hit really hard. Retail.
So you saw the startups that reflected the industries being hit canceling Canny.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Interesting.
That was the really only impact. I feel like it kind of blew over in a couple months, but during that time we were kind of like, oh, like anything can happen. Let's keep an eye on it. But yeah, it blew over pretty quick. Like we're doing really well now. So yeah, we never went into this mode where we're like, we need to really plan on not being here in the next month, whatever. That was never a situation. So we're really happy about that. Really, it's just like, how do we get more customers? How do we hit the growth goals that we set for ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, my last question here, post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Do you stay in Toronto? Are you going to go travel the world and get out of your house/apartment?
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, Andrew and I are opposites, which actually comes in handy a lot. You know, he's very optimistic about things. I'm very pessimistic, or I guess realistic about things. And so when we were doing the traveling, it was very much me like, wow, I love traveling. Let's keep doing this forever. And he was kind of like, I didn't know I was going to be doing this forever. So we kind of made a list of cities. This is actually right before the pandemic. So this wasn't pandemic induced.
Oh, interesting.
So we kind of made a list of cities. San Francisco was on there, New York, Seattle, Toronto. So we ended up in Toronto, and I'm really happy to be here. I think it's a really cool place. I think, especially during the pandemic, it's the place to be. So yeah, I think, especially now that we have a dog and everything, it'll be much harder to travel. So we'll probably be here for the most part.
All right. Well, Sarah, I really appreciate your time, your insights. Great to get to talk to you.
You as well, Campbell. Thanks for having me.
That's Sarah Hum, one of the ones who succeed. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, it would be amazing if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcast. It really helps us out. Or why not tell a friend? That also helps new listeners discover the show. I really appreciate it. If you want to see clips from the show and stay up to date with what I'm working on, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Campbell J. Barron. You've made it to the end of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Campbell Barron, and I'll be back in no time.